Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, BIC, for organizing this talk on happiness, much needed in today's competitive and complicated world. A little about this particular program. It's finally happened just a year later. BIC contacted me in December 2022 to be their interlocutor for this book called Hardwired for Happiness, written by Ashish Kothari from the US. That was my first introduction to Ashish, after which we connected virtually and have stayed very closely in touch. I should mention that we've met offline only this morning. I'll digress a bit here. First of all, let me say that I'm a firm believer in the universe unfolding for you at the right time, and people coming into your life when they are meant to, for the explicit reason that there is meant to be some learning and evolution for both the individuals involved. And I must say, over the last year, I've learned a lot. Since I'm a happiness mentor, the book was of great interest to me, and I immediately bought the book on Amazon and realized that finally, here was a book that combined Western positive psychology with Eastern philosophy, very ably blending the art and science of happiness. I always wondered why positive psychology had not delved deeper into our unlimited reserve of Eastern philosophy. Now, a little bit about the author. Ashish Kothari is an executive coach, author, and founder of Happiness Squad, a company focused on helping individuals and organizations unlock their full potential by making happiness their competitive edge. In this book, Hardwired for Happiness, Ashish outlines an easy-to-follow recipe that can help anyone increase joy, health, love, and meaning in their lives. His transformational approach is secular, interdisciplinary, and integrates learnings and best practices across the fields of science and spirituality. Prior to starting Happiness Squad, Ashish spent over 17 years at McKinsey & Company, where he developed and co-led the adaptability and resilience offering for McKinsey. During his time there, he supported thousands of leaders and their organizations succeed through increasing their effectiveness, re-energizing organizations, building more human-centric cultures, and building new mindsets and capabilities at scale. Ashish is a Newfield certified ontological coach, trained to help leaders overcome obstacles through the use of language, mood, and somatics to shift how they observe the world. He also has a master's in business administration with a specialization in organizational behavior from Chicago Booth and a bachelor's and master's degree in chemical engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, India. It's wonderful to have you here, Ashish. So let's get on with the discussion, starting first with your journey and subsequently the book. At the outset, you had a glorious career with McKinsey, and you moved out of a comfortable lifestyle to start out on your own. I'm sure many of us would like to know why you made this career shift. Tell us a little bit about your personal journey, and at what point did you feel the need to write this book?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for joining us. It's such a pleasure and such an honor to have a chance to be here in conversation with you, Beena, and to have you all in the audience. So I have a secret. The actual book I wrote was not Hardwired for Happiness. In fact, happiness had nothing to do with what I was researching or what I was writing on. The book that I actually wrote was called From Fear to Freedom, a journey from within to living your best life. And it all came because my own personal struggle at 42, 43 with anxiety. You see, I had the perfect, I was the perfect American dream. I'd come to the US with about $5,000 in my pocket, which was a loan. And through all that I had learned in India, work hard, work harder than the next one, really give it your best. And I had made partner in 5 years at McKinsey. I was really successful. I was doing really well. I had found an amazing, my wife I met at McKinsey, and I'm really grateful to have found her, because I can say this with hand on heart, I love her every day more than the day I met her. Every day than the day before, I love her more. And it's really special, to have that kind of a relationship. I had an amazing son. My health was good. My parents were great. I loved McKinsey, the work that we were doing, the impact we were having. I've always had great friends. So, everything that I learned about do all this and then you should be happy and you should be having the time of your life, everything was green, and I was waking up every morning with anxiety that made me feel like throwing up. I used to wake up many days curled up in a ball. And I didn't know why, right? And the analytical mind, I was like, I need to know the answer. And it was not knowing that was actually more upsetting than actually the fact that I was anxious. And look, and in our fast-paced world of quick fixes, advice was plenty. Many well-wishers said, hey, you should talk to a therapist. And look, therapists are wonderful, but I was like, I don't have a trauma in my past, and there is nothing about the future that is worrying me, so why talk to somebody? Others said, go see a doctor and they'll give you a pill. You know how many people are on anxiety pills? It'll go away tomorrow. And I didn't want to do that either. I truly wanted to find out why it was, and guess where do you turn? So I decided to go deep, looking at what makes us afraid, but more importantly, what keeps us there. And I started looking in the fields of spirituality, psychology, neurosciences, philosophy. That's really the journey that I took, Bina. And what I discovered was some of the things we'll talk about in the book. But cut this long story short, as I practiced, as I integrated what I was learning in these fields and seeing the similarities, I had rid myself of anxiety. I was actually living the best life I had ever lived. My last 5 years at the firm were unbelievable. And then COVID hits. Recognizing with the work I had done personally and with others in the firm, I was asked to lead our adaptability and resilience offering. It was a brand new offering. We recognized that the world was getting a lot scarier very quickly, right? March of 2020, everything shut down. We literally had something that was threatening our lives. So imagine fear, all of a sudden, was going to be amplified because there was a real threat, not just a psychological threat. And that's when I wrote the book, because I was like, listen, what I have learned, I want to put into a book. But as I built on the offering, I couldn't stop at that, Bina. Because what I realized was there was another lie that I had been living over the last 5 years. The lie was that stress, anxiety, and burnout are prices insecure overachievers pay. To have more power, to have more money, to have more influence, to have more fame. But if you don't want all of that, that's okay. Life is good. You can make a choice, right? No pain, no gain, right? It was the biggest lie. Because in my research, I found that stress, anxiety, and burnout was a universal issue. 40 to 60% were burnt out. In fact, teachers and doctors were burnt out more than private equity guys. Frontline was burnt out more than executives. And that was the starting of Happiness Squad. I couldn't stay at McKinsey any longer because I knew that with the firm, the only people that I would serve are the top of the tops. And this is something that was needed around the world. And that's why we set this mission for ourselves. We are 1 year in, we'll see how far we get. But our goal was, how do we help 1 billion people? How do we truly democratize happiness? How do we truly help build habits? A long answer, but that was kind of a little bit of those pivotal moments, that are kind of making us do what we're doing now.
You did also spend a lot of time in India, right? You were with some of the gurus.
Yeah, so a lot of time. So look, I got so a lot of time in India. Sadhguru, I studied with him. Sri Ravi Shankar. I studied a lot of the Vedanta philosophies. I actually read a lot of the Upanishads, the Vedas, but I also studied so much of Buddhist texts as well as the Quran, the Bible, and it was amazing to see how all of these practices, all of these different kind of, if you will, spiritual traditions or religious traditions, while the why you should do something was different, right? Do it because Allah says it, or Christ says it, or, whatever it was. What they were asking you to do was the same.
Yeah.
Right? I also did the Vipassana meditation. It was quite a journey. And it all kind of pointed us back, brought me back over and over to the same practices that science was just excited, positive psychology was excited to discover 20 years ago. We've known about them for thousands of years.
That's right. That's right. When you start the book, you talk about the 4 paradoxes of today's living. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So friends, I ask you to consider these 4 paradoxes, which became the kind of start of my book, but also was kind of a big driver behind this work. So think about this. We are more prosperous. That's the first paradox, prosperity. We are more prosperous than any generation that has ever lived. Right? I wouldn't swap places with any prior generation. The number of people living in poverty has dropped from 50% about 200 years ago to less than 10%. So even the poorest amongst us are actually doing better, right? But yet we are more stressed and we are more anxious, and we are consuming at an ever-increasing rate per capita. Of course, we are larger in numbers. So think about that paradox and why that might be. The second one is the paradox of health, right? So over the last 100 years, our lifespan has doubled. Yeah. Almost anything other than COVID, external, that could actually kill us, all those 3 biggest drivers of death, diphtheria, influenza, they've disappeared. Now the biggest ailments that we struggle with are chronic. The top 3 drivers of death today are heart disease, cancer, right? These are the things that kill us. So again, we are manufacturing our own illnesses. Why is that? On one hand, we have amazing breakthroughs, and our quality of life, by the way, that we are winning back, are not joyful years. So many struggle from chronic ailments. Huge number, in fact, 80%, right? Post 60 are struggling with this. The third is the paradox of, if you think about connection, right? We are more connected today than ever before. We want to have digital detox now because we feel so connected. I spent time in Italy, deep in Italy, where I couldn't speak the language and they didn't understand English, and we could real-time communicate using Google Translate. We should be able to understand each other. We should be a lot more connected together as a world. We are more polarized than we've ever been. We are polarized across countries. We are polarized within countries. We are polarized within communities. So imagine that. That's the paradox of connection. And the fourth is paradox of convenience. Right? Today, we can do almost everything at 90%, if not faster, less effort. Are we swimming in free time? We're not. We are busier than ever before. And so these paradoxes, right, I invite you to consider, why is it? And hence, why is it so hard? Why aren't we happier as a generation? Why aren't we thriving? Why are we struggling under the weight of our own prosperity? And that's the insight around how our brains work and why our brains are actually, which took us to the top of the food chains, are actually now causing so much stress in our world today. Right? In effect, that's, if you look at the title, it's We Are Hardwired for Fear. That was my hypothesis. And that was kind of the evidence that I looked for. Genuinely, our hardwiring for fear, which is getting even more accentuated because the world is becoming more complex, is the reason why we are struggling so much. And hence why happiness is truly something that we need to work on, if it's really more happiness as a state.
True. Your book is actually based on a sunflower model, which you've actually trademarked, and 9 key practices. So let's talk a little bit about those.
Yeah.
I think they've put it up on the screen.
They have. So friends, this hardwiring for fear, I'll talk a little bit about this and why these 9 practices are so powerful. As I mentioned, these paradoxes come from a really interesting property of our brain, right? If you look at our evolutionary history, over millions of years that we've evolved, our brains evolved to keep us safe, not necessarily to keep us happy. Why? Well, because 20,000 years ago, we are all lucky survivors of people whose fight, flight, freeze circuits were really, really good. We were amazing at spotting threat, something that would get us in the environment, and be able to take action against it, right? That's what we evolved. That's the brains evolved. You had to spot a threat and respond. And how did we respond? We responded with adrenaline and cortisol, our neural systems, working, preparing us to fight, flight, or freeze. That is what our historical evolution is. The safety we enjoy, the convenience we enjoy is a vestige of the last 20,000 years. With agriculture, with settlement, with everything else that has come after it. Our brains have evolved over millions of years. And in a world which is more complex, we are constantly triggered, and our brains don't know a physical threat, that of a tiger, versus that of a psychological threat, worrying about the future. You know, the war that's happening and the implication, or the inflation that's rising, or the tsunami that is hitting. Our brain doesn't differentiate that. So we are constantly triggered through the day. And that's what keeps us struggling. These 9 practices, which I found in every wisdom tradition, are grounded by science from research in positive psychology, that these actually really help us experience the world differently. And they have backing in neuroscience that experience of the world that we see different comes because of fundamental changes in our brain structure. That's what each one of these 9 hardwired for happiness practices are about. No surprise, they start with awareness at the heart. And that was kind of my unique contribution to the field. These practices are very common, right? They're in every tradition. I didn't design any one of them. I didn't invent any of them. But awareness at the heart of it is a very interesting construct that doesn't show up in many of the other frameworks. And I fundamentally believe without awareness, none of them can actually be activated. And if you think about the lives we live and how we lead, awareness is what's our blind spot. There is no space. We're not even aware of how we are making sense of the world. And if we are not aware of that, how else do we activate anything else? So that's what the 9 practices are. Fundamentally, everyone rewires our brain.
Will you explain a few of them which you think are critical?
Yeah, so let's start with awareness. Awareness is the most important because in the end, awareness is about how we make sense of the world. We are meaning-making machines, and we make meaning based on our beliefs. How do we pick up those beliefs? We pick up beliefs based on our experiences. We form beliefs based on what we learn from those older than us, our teachers, our parents, right? And these beliefs become like glasses through which we see the world. Some of us wear pink ones, some of us wear green ones, some of us wear red ones, whatever you want to call them, but that's how we see the world. Often blind to our own beliefs that are shaping it, which are not facts, but just our assessments of what's happening. These mental models is how we experience the world and how we take action. Till we become aware of our own mental models, what's behind them, and whether they're serving us or not, very little is possible. Because only through these mental models do certain actions become possible. And so I provide a framework which is grounded in ontology in the book around how we make sense of the world using language, so beliefs, moods, and emotions, what we are experiencing right now, and feelings, body sensations. Together, they make a unique observer. And if we can get a separation from that, which many spiritual traditions are really good at and talk about, you're not your body, you're not your mind. You can start to actually create that space in the distance and create a different reality for you. From awareness, purpose becomes possible. Why? Because our own dharma, our own purpose, isn't something we can look out there to find, right? We have to find it in here. And it's not even that important to find what the meaning of life is, because that's a lifelong question of philosophy and we can discuss it. But if we can find meaning in our life, if we can do everything with meaning, it makes us more resilient. Nietzsche said it best, those who have a why can survive anyhow. The next practice is gratitude, and gratitude is a really powerful one. Gratitude is about recognizing the abundance that we actually have versus what we don't have in the world, right? See, our brains have this negativity bias. By their design, they don't notice the good. They only notice the bad. And we also don't have the ability to notice the good in granularity, and I'll give you an example of that. Let's say if you stub your toe, right, and the toe's hurting, and somebody says, how are you? I bet you most of the time we'll talk about the toe because that toe's bothering us at that moment. Oh, I'm good, but my toe's really hurting. Notice, my toe's hurting. But if we ask somebody where the toe is not hurting, and you're actually okay that day, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. I'm grateful for my health. Granular, gross, right? And so this notion of even noticing that any point in time, any day, there's so much of what's happening in our body, if one of them stopped working, it would be a major issue. We forget all that. And that's true across so many domains. So this notion of training our brain to count the blessings, in 6 or 8 weeks, if we make it into a practice, has a 20 to 30% improvement in how we, if we are feeling depressed, reduction in the days that we feel depressed or the extent of it, it changes our experience because, again, it changes the wiring of the brain from negative to the positive. So those are 3 of them. Mindfulness is a really powerful one that so many talk about. It's one of the most dominant ones that literally allow our brain structures to change, our prefrontal cortex grows, our fight, flight, freeze region, amygdala shrinks. 2,000 plus years old, 2,500 years old, in fact, right? Something that we know that works. And what I've tried to do in the book is break it down where if you don't have time to meditate, you can still choose to be mindful. Because it's not important that we meditate. If we can be mindful, we can get some of the same experiences. So those are 4, to kind of give you a bit. I can go over the other 5 too, Beena, but...
Okay, let's bring our focus to corporates. For an organization to flourish, what do they need to do? You talk about a combination of individual as well as corporate interventions for an organization to flourish. And you also suggest a proportion of or percentage of individual to corporate interventions needed for it to be effective. So what is that? What is that? Can you explain?
So I think that's a great question. I think it's a really, really important question. I think it's especially important for us in India. We are leading the world when it comes to how we are doing in terms of our overall health and well-being. Recent research done by McKinsey Health Institute came out actually about 6 weeks ago. I was shocked to see the numbers. So we lead the world in overall health. They outlined a framework of physical, emotional, spiritual, and social. We lead it, right? They also looked at a second measure, Beena, which was shocking. That was the measure of burnout. Burnout not based on responding to do you feel burnt out, but the clinical definition of burnout, which is I feel that I am struggling. I feel exhausted, first measure. I feel cynical that things are going to get better, or I feel a distance from my job. And third is I am actually struggling either emotionally or cognitively to perform at the level that I would, right? So I'm feeling I don't have as much empathy or things are taking longer. Those are the clinical definition of if you are high on all of them, then you are experiencing burnout. The survey was done across 30,000 participants across 30 countries. The global number for burnout is about 20%. The US is 16%. Can anybody guess what the number for India was? What percentage of people who responded said they feel burnt out or close to burnout according to these measures? How many of you think 30%? Raise your hand. How many of you think 40%? 50%? 60%? The number was 60%. India there were only 3 out of 30 countries that were above 30. Every other country was below 30. The average was 20. India 60%, it's 59%. That's how high issue of burnout it is. And burnout has a huge human cost, right? Because burnout is the precursor to so much of mental health issues it's a bit like glass. Once you crack it, it never really quite goes away. You learn to manage around it. But it also has a huge performance implication for corporates. Those who are burnt out are 20 to 30% productive at best. And it doesn't happen that today you're there and now you're burnt out. There is a long period of people not even recognizing that they're nearing it. They're not operating at their best. They're not the most creative. The productivity is down. So there's a huge cost to performance, to creativity, to decision-making, to collaboration. And that's why, I talk a lot around a real need to truly integrate the individual practices and the organizational flourishing practices into our organizations. Because the research was also very, very clear. All current interventions, Meena, today, if you think about any well-being work or mental health work, investments have gone up significantly, but almost all of them have gone and they've targeted the individual. Let me give you Calm and Headspace, and let me give you a nutritionist, and we're going to put a gym here, and we'll give you some sick days, or we'll give you mental health days, right? All of those are individual interventions. The research was also very clear. Only 30% of individual interventions actually drive overall health. 70% are team, job, and organization, right? So unless we fundamentally change the way we work and integrate these practices into our jobs, we're not going to see the results. When it comes to burnout, it's even worse. Only 3% of burnout is because of individual. 97% is about organizations that we as leaders create, the demands we create in the jobs, etc. And that's why I feel so compelled, right, around actually taking this work. It's almost come full circle, Beena, for me. This all started from all of this work actually is originated from the spiritual wisdom around how we work, why we work. These practices are there. If we don't integrate them, and it's not important about knowing them, because we know about these, right? Everybody knows meditation is good. How many people meditate? Show of hands. How many meditate? Right? So about 30%. Second question, of those who meditate regularly, how many of you are mindful moment to moment? How many are mindful? Yeah. So there's a huge gap, there's a huge chasm, one between knowing and doing, and then there is a chasm between doing and being. Even those of us who meditate, while we can hold our attention and be in the moment while we are on the mat, we spend most of our time off the mat. We check phones 360 times a day. We are constantly interrupted. And that's the work we need to do. We have to go away from corporate trainings to implementations. We have to go from YouTube videos where we watch somebody and we listen to a pravachan to actually living that work. And only then do we make the difference. Only then do we, win this battle.
True. You have something that you've developed called the Pearl model, right? That's for corporates.
Yes.
And we have the Sunflower model for individuals, right?
Yeah, so the idea behind this was the following. Sunflower is really powerful because every one of these interventions can be taken by an individual and applied it to their work, right? Look, we spend most of our time at work. And, I'm a big believer in if we can make these things integrated into work and transform our work, it'll make a difference. And so these practices are about actions that any individual can take. They don't need the permission of the company or their boss to be able to make these changes, but we have to do the practice. The Pearl model is about the other 70% for well-being and 97% for burnout. So it's specifically a model that we designed, which is around helping people leaders truly transform the way work gets done, the way people make meaning in those organizations, the way they build tight connections and community to be able to make this happen. So both of those models are what we are really excited to kind of really take to companies here to help them, implement. Because there is no reason in a time where we are more connected, more prosperous, this should be the state in which we are operating. And I actually, the reason I left my cushy job was, I have a 13-year-old. And I fundamentally believed, this was about a year and a half ago, that unless we rewire at scale, we are not going to get out of the crisis that we are swimming in almost every sphere. Ecological, economic, political, humanitarian. Because when we take action out of fear, hardwired for fear, we don't solve for the other. We can talk about long term, but we won't solve for the long term. If I'm afraid, I'm going to short for the short term, right? I need to survive another day. I'm not worried about the next month, the next quarter, the next year. I'm not going to take decisions for the other. So that's why I think it's really important that we actually make traction on this and make it quickly. Otherwise, I think the planet will be fine. We've gone through multiple extinctions on Earth, and the planet comes back. But I'm not sure our future generations, we leave them a planet that will be inhabitable or hospitable, right, to us.
Ashish, we do have some time. Do you think you could take us through a practice, all of us?
Absolutely. So, given that this is evening, and given that so many of you probably came from work or others, why don't we do a quick meditation together, if folks are up for that? There were 30% who meditate, so you can, it'll not be new for you, but for the other 60, 70%, I want you to experience the power of it and how little can go how long and how far. Yeah, so I invite you in a short meditation with me. So for this one, really simple. Let's just keep sitting. Plant our feet. I invite you to keep your back straight. And you can either dim your eyes or close them. The whole idea is to cut off external stimulus. And just bring your attention to your breath. Breathing in, just follow your breath, knowing you're breathing in. And just breathe out. And just notice that you're breathing out. Take another breath in. Feel your belly expand. And as you exhale, just release any tension that you might face. Take a third breath, even deeper. And this one, just exhale with your mouth completely and relax completely. As you resume breathing at your normal pace, I just invite you to shift your attention to the base of your feet. Press the floor Feel the floor support you. Just get in touch with this dimension. It's the dimension of stability. It's the ground. It's connected. It supports you. This is always there. Notice you can come back to this. If in your days you find yourself unstable, unsure of your footing. Keep breathing, and this time I invite you to shift your attention to the top of your head. Extend into your full length. Imagine a little string just pulling your head up. Breathe into that dimension. It's the dimension of dignity. It's the dimension that says you are enough just as you are. There is no need to do anything, achieve anything. You are enough. With your next breath, I invite you to shift your attention to your width. Bring your attention to the edge of your shoulders and feel your width. This is the dimension of connection. You're not alone. Think about the friends and family that are in your life, your fellow attendees and members of BIC, and others in your community and at work. In a world where we feel increasingly lonely, we're not. We're supported. We are an interbeing with people we might not even recognize. So feel that dimension with your width. And finally, I invite you with your next breath to feel your depth. You might even want to lean back a little bit. Feel your depth. That is the dimension of wisdom. It's the dimension that carries all your successes and lessons from your failures, those moments when you stumbled and you found the courage to move forward again. All of these 4 dimensions reside within us and are accessible. So let's touch them again. Breath, send it to your feet, stability. With the next breath, take it to the top of your head. The next one, bring it to your shoulders, connection. And finally, your depth, wisdom. Take a couple of more breaths. Be with the sensation. Follow your breath. Be with the feeling of going in and breathing out. And then in your own time, slowly open your eyes and come back together. So that's a short 5-minute meditation practice. And this is something that we can do any time in the day. Right? It's accessible to us. It doesn't take a long time. But it has a powerful effect. If any of you are feeling calmer, it's because we've given our parasympathetic system a chance through breath to catch up to our sympathetic, our fight, flight, freeze system. And we can activate it within 2 minutes of breathing intentionally. That's all it takes.
Thank you. I'm feeling so calm. I don't know how I can speak now. Anyway, so I wanted to bring you back to define your purpose.
Yes.
And I'd like to share an incident that happened with me. A lot of us work just for making money for our needs, and we think that work has to be suffered with the sole intent of providing for ourselves and family. There's no happiness to be had at work. Work is just the provider, completely missing out on the fact that we spend most of our waking time at work. In your book, you talked about infusing more passion and meaning into one's work and making ourselves happy in the workplace. You also talk about ikigai. So can you explain in more detail? But just before you do that, I wanted to talk about one of the experiences that I had. I was talking to the hairstylist in a beauty parlor about happiness and giving them a talk on that. And I asked them, I said, what do you think your job is? And this is the response I got. I style hair, I cut hair, I color hair, I do this, I do that. And, and everything was related to what they actually did. But what they actually lost out on, and which I explained to them later, was that there was a larger purpose that served humanity. Can you imagine the person that walks into the beauty parlor, sits on that chair, and has her hair styled or his hair styled? What is the confidence level and what is the joy with which they walk out of that chair? And so there's so much more to just, styling somebody's hair. There's a lot more. I mean, it's a much larger purpose. And I think you can explain that a little bit because we were talking about in the afternoon about how there is a larger purpose to everything, to all work. Because all work is meant for, for the needs of people, to make them happier. So can you explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. So meaning in life really matters, right? The research is very clear on this. Those who find meaning in what they do every day are more resilient, are more adaptable, live longer, have better relationships, are, by the way, more productive, right? And this is not just limited, I think, Beena, what you're highlighting, to one profession or the other. There are two researchers who, by the way, this is deeply grounded in all of our spiritual wisdom. Dharma, right? What you should do, what you're meant to be doing. Right action, it's in Buddhism. In the field of psychology, there are two researchers who really looked at the power of this practice as a way to alleviate suffering, right? Which was, Buddha determined right action just through his own self-awareness and self-introspection, how important right action was if we are truly going to live a life and find our way out of suffering, right? Really, really important. The two researchers were Jane Dutton and Amy Wrzesniewski. And what they found was a little bit of what you highlighted in your experience with the hairdressers. Across almost every profession, there were three ways in which most people made sense of their work. For some, it was nothing more than as a way to earn money so they could live. That's true for 70% of the people. Yeah. It's nothing more as a way to live my life, right? Yeah. Then there were a certain percentage for when the work was a profession, it was a way to progress forward, right? And then there were a small percentage for whom the work was their calling, right? By the way, this was something they found, and what they found was this was true across all professions. It showed up with janitors in hospitals, where for some they were just cleaning, some they were the entry-level job to kind of play more supervisor roles. But for the third category, they described their job as I heal patients. My job is in healing patients, right? This shows up in 2,000-year-old parable about the three people who were making walls. For one, he was a bricklayer, and it is around laying bricks. And he says, this is what I do. My father was a bricklayer. My grandfather was a bricklayer. This is what I do. This is how I provide for my family. The second one, it was about progressing to become a site, right? Run a site, and he had these aspirations. And for the third one, he said, I'm not laying bricks. I'm building a cathedral where people can experience the power of God. So this notion of meaning making is so driven. Viktor Frankl's work on logotherapy and his whole contribution to the world was man is not looking for fame or power like the Freudian world. Man's search is for meaning. We're looking for meaning in our day-to-day life. That's what our life is about. And that is the power of this practice. If we truly, as people leaders, help people connect, which is a little bit of what you did, Beena, with the hairdressers, right? hey, what is the bigger why? What is the purpose that we're solving? For any company to be solvent, they have to be providing something of value to some human who is then willing to transact and pay for it. Right? So it doesn't matter what we do. We are playing a bigger role in serving someone. The problem is, for many of us, we are so far down that we lose track of that, and it's not present for us in day-to-day. And if we are able to do that as organizational leaders, and if we are able to do that as individuals, all of a sudden, we become more resilient. And it's best captured in this Nietzsche quote, who said, those who have a why can survive anyhow. Right? And it's such a powerful practice, because it is our ability to make meaning that can transform the most heartbreaking tragedy into our ability to navigate from that and become better versions of ourselves, and take that and contribute it in a very positive way.
Right. So I'd like to end our talk with a very profound, incisive statement you make at the end of your first chapter. You say, overcoming our deeply rooted fears of not having enough, not doing enough, and being enough is a lifelong journey. And truly, that is what underlies our unhappiness. We have to move from not being enough to being enough. How do we do that?
Yeah, so this notion of happiness, right? Happiness is a choice. We are called human beings, but I'm not sure that's what any alien who observed the human race would call us. We would call us human doings. We are constantly in action trying to achieve more, because our whole sense of worth is tied out there, right? We're constantly playing an if-then-else game. If I get this, then I'm going to be happy. We get there and then we say, well, that wasn't good enough. Now I want this, right? Because we're constantly on this treadmill. And there is nothing wrong in that, because the problem is our sense-making instrument is broken. As I mentioned, our brains have a negativity bias. We will always be looking for the next things. There's a process called hedonic adaptation, which is what we get, we normalize and we look for the next thing. It, by the way, protects us in the face of tragedies too, right? It allows us to bounce forward from that too, if we otherwise we would be stuck in it. And that's why this a notion of practices, these practices that are here, that are in any tradition, it is a lifelong journey, because talking about them is easy. Doing them every day is hard. And the way we can do that is actually through consistency and repetition. If we make these into habits, right? Think about that. 50 to 90% of what we do every day is habit-driven. We can make these into habits. We can repeat the same. We can start with one practice, make it small, repeat it, build new neural pathways, then go to the next one, go to the next one. And over time, we can master our inner worlds. We can rewire our brains so that we can truly enjoy the prosperity that we have created and make a much bigger impact for everybody else out there.
You've suggested many simple practices, many of which, if incorporated, like you said, in our daily life as habits, help to rewire our brains to move to this joyful mind space in our lives, where we are satisfied with the past and the present, optimistic about the future, and feel fulfilled by what we are pursuing, enjoy connections with others and the universe, and thrive physically, mentally, and emotionally. So I highly recommend all of you to get the book on Amazon and find some sound practices that resonate with you for happier living. They're easy and require you to spend only a few minutes a day. So here's the book. This is and this is available on Amazon. I think we are going to put yeah, there you are. If you scan that, you can get the link to buy the book. So thank you so much, Ashish, for sharing your journey and telling us a lot about your book. Can we now open it for audience questions? We would like you to come up to the mic here on the left and ask your questions. Thank you.
My name is Vishwanath, and I really enjoyed what you spoke about today. A lot of things, as you mentioned, we've learned in many of our traditions as well, but putting it into practice is difficult. One of the things that it seems to me, that makes it difficult to put into practice is that the organizations that we work for seem to go counter to all of these things. I have a PhD from the Booth School, and I teach finance. And I've read about McKinsey. And I had to work hard to go away from the things that I learned at the Booth School. And it seems to me that McKinsey, I read Anand Giridharlal's book about McKinsey. It seems like McKinsey is doing a lot of the things that are contrary to what you're saying. So it's possible that I have everything wrong, but I'm wondering if you think those institutions have, or other institutions like those, have a negative part in making us what we are, and more generally, maybe I'm wrong about that, but maybe you can tell us about how we can sort of counter all these other influences, institutional influences in our life.
No, thank you. That's a great question. And while I would say I'll answer it in two ways. I think the first is, I think there is a lot of, we are judgment-making machines, right? We always like to think about good and bad, right and wrong, light and dark, when there really isn't anything like that. There's really polarities. We need both in the world to be able to navigate and work through. Yes, in today's environment, because of this hardwiring for fear and because of the capitalistic structure that is created, which so much focuses on the short term, these problems are exacerbated. Until recently, the data has also not been clear on the impact of this on performance, right? But that is actually changing. So one of the guys who we are collaborating with, he's a professor at London Business School. He's actually an economist, right? And he, for the first time, proved that companies with high employee satisfaction, which will come, right, if the employees are flourishing, drive 2 to 3.5% higher stock market returns year over year, over 10-year horizons. It's one of the most dominant strategies for companies to pursue. So I think the reason I say it's a two-part answer is, I think we can appeal to companies doing the right things from a human angle, because the suffering is immense that we experience, but we can now also appeal to them through real hard data. Because this study was the only study that actually showed causation. It actually future predicted stock market returns going forward 10, 20 years for companies with high satisfaction versus others, right? So accounting for every other factor as industry effects, technology effects, size of firm effects. So really, really powerful. But I do think this will change. And for many of my corporate talks, I, Vishwanath, always open with these three questions. And I'll ask you the same questions, then I'll see what the results are. I ask them always this first question, because really we are trying to fundamentally change people's mindsets on this, right? I ask, how many people believe Earth is flat? How many here believe Earth is flat? No one. 10%, so there's about 1% of Americans who believe Earth is flat. 500 years ago, that number was 50-50. How many believe global warming is real? Raise your hands. Right? Almost all. 10% still believe global warming is not real. That number was 50-50. 50 years ago. And I asked this third question. How many people believe that taking care of your people can help you drive superior shareholder returns? Right? The numbers are mixed. But I think that's about to change, and I fundamentally believe in 50 years that's not going to be a question which answers will be any different than the other two. Because our next generation will demand it, they're demanding it, they're not willing to stick up to what our generation and others have stuck up for, and governments will regulate it. In the US, the Surgeon General has provided a framework where mental health is put at the same level as employee health and safety. The first lawsuits have been awarded to employees in the UK against toxic workplaces. This is coming. And so really the only choice as organizations I see is, do we want to be a leader and really build a competitive advantage by doing these before others? Or do we want to play the catch-up game in 50 years? Because I think that's where we can get, and I think it'll make for a better world. Yeah.
I hope that answers your question. All right. Okay. Can we have the next question, please?
Hello, my name is Reena, and thanks for the insightful talk. If you could clarify a little further on what's the difference between living mindfully and intentionally? Because I think living mindfully is about living intentionally, right? So I couldn't really catch the difference.
Great question, Reena. So here's the way I've described living mindfully versus living intentionally. For me, living mindfully is, are we really training our brain to be in the present moment, to be in the here and now, right? Our brains are wandering brains. They're mostly caught, they either go in the past to learn from what hasn't worked well, or they're out in the future, thinking about what's going to get us, and we create anxiety, right? Very little is spent in the moment, experiencing life as it is right now. That's really what I mean about living mindfully. Living intentionally is, what's the bigger story of your life? Where do you want to go? So this is the long term. What are you solving for? What parts of your life are going well? Think about wealth, health, love, and meaning. Where do you want it to be in a year, in 3 years, a quarter, all of those dimensions, and then consciously creating systems that allow the day-to-day noises, the day-to-day demands of everybody else in our lives to take us away from that. So it's this notion of setting your direction and really being the captain of your ship that takes you to there. So that's how I differentiate. One's a bit long-term, to say where do you want to go and how do you truly get there, setting that goal. And the other is day-to-day, making sure that you're actually enjoying the journey on the way there. Yeah?
Any questions? Yeah.
Hello. I'm Gautami. I live close by. So this afternoon, I actually had a call. So I work for a corporate, and this was from McKinsey. So it was around some consulting part. But this is like, the evening where it's quite different. And so just when you spoke about, the intention part, now I'm somebody who's in 20s, and I think every day I'm mostly happy. But the more I read around define or have a purpose in life, it just feels like, one day I want to work for a corporate, one day I want to be an artist, and one day I want to be a yoga teacher. It's like every day there's so many things, but whatever I do, I'm very happy with whatever I've been doing. So what is really defined purpose? And at the same time, all of us are having journeys, right? So probably these 5 years I'm going through something, and the next 5 years I'm a little wise than, what happened the previous 5 years ago. So
Yes.
how do we move on, and how do I know what's the purpose?
Yeah, so it's a beautiful question, right? It's this notion of, first of all, how do we make meaning? And does that stay the same, or does that change? And is that okay if it changes, right, over time? What I would say is the following. I think the first is, I think it's important that we actually, what we are making meaning in what we are doing. right? So whether it is, and often the way we make meaning is by connecting to the bigger impact we are having for the other. It's also anchoring it to the bigger impact for you, right? If you're doing something that's helping you grow in some way and is making a difference out there, that's beautiful, right? So that's, as long as we have that, rather than we're only doing it to earn money, I think it matters. And by the way, that is so important because look, I mean, we are living in a world where I always say, listen, if you are in your younger years, right, you're in your 20s and 30s, the proportion, the quality of life later in life is almost directly proportional to how much of the time you spend sweating versus watching others sweat, right? Because we are building, we are growing right through. Nothing gets formed without heat, without crucibles. And so hard work is given. I think what gives hard work meaning is if it's in the pursuit of something that matters to the other or to you. So really that's, and the way to do that, I highlight this model that I found to be very, very practical, which is the Ikigai model. So at any point of time, thinking about 4 things. How can I integrate more of what I love into whatever I'm doing, right? Second is it leveraging my strengths in the day-to-day that I'm doing? Is it in the service of somebody, a need that I'm serving? And fourth is something that the world is willing to pay for. If we find these 4, and I believe fundamentally those opportunities exist in almost every job, if we can consciously connect that, then we find meaning. And that's why I say this is about finding meaning in our life and our day-to-day. This is not about exploring the meaning of life, because I haven't found what that meaning is. Hopefully, maybe you will. But I think the second one makes it worthwhile.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting and informative talk. See, you mentioned about dharma and you also mentioned about right action. So these are all principles that we are deriving from Bhagavad Gita. So how relevant is Bhagavad Gita to today's management principles? Because many people are adopting Bhagavad Gita in terms of management. So how relevant is it? Similarly, you talked about Gautam Buddha also. Gautam Buddha lived in a very different age and different times where we did not probably have this kind of corporate pressures. So can you please draw some insight?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think the Gita, any of the spiritual wisdom that is in our, any of the wisdom, Stoics, our Bhagavad Gita, Buddhism, Taoism, I think it's more relevant than ever before. Because the suffering is so high, right? What I especially like, for me, the biggest element of Bhagavad Gita, which is so needed, right, in the day-to-day, is this notion of karma for the sake of karma, but not worrying about the outcomes, right? We need that so much. And if we are going to go for an outcome, how do we make sure that that outcome is actually making a positive difference in the world, in a bigger scheme, not just in the immediate world? So many of the teachings, the Buddhist, the other teaching of impermanence, is so relevant in today's world because we get so caught in this is how it is, right? We want to preserve what we've got. We constantly are solving for right and wrong. So I think these teachings are really, really relevant. They need to be lived in our day-to-day interactions. In certain ways, still what I would say is certain ways till the capitalistic markets change, we have to find ways to keep it alive within. I think it's a lot easier in private enterprises than capital market-driven enterprises, right? Because the near-term pressures are not there. But by the way, if you look at all the work done by Raj Sisodia and others around conscious capitalism, those firms outperform others over time, right? And frankly, that is the need of the hour. I always talk about it this way. Two companies make the same product, Gap and Patagonia. Completely different companies in terms of the impact on the planet, the impact on the people. What drives the difference? It's the consciousness of the leadership team and from where they grew, right? And so we have to start the journey. And ideally, the next set of startups can incorporate many of these principles, but also the more conscious leaders in the bigger public companies can actually start to create some of these changes so that over time we actually change, right? We actually change the world. But it's a hard journey. It's an incredibly hard journey because of the pressures of the stock markets. Yeah.
I'd like to actually bring to light another concept from the Bhagavad Gita, which is about Swadharma and Swabhava. So Swabhava is your intrinsic nature, your capabilities, your talents, which according to the Gita, you carry forward from lifetime to lifetime and improve on it. And Swadharma is what you do for your everyday living. And when these two concepts come together, magic happens, literally magic happens. And I can tell you this from my own experience. When I was in my 40s, I was working in a company, and my passion was actually, I loved fashion. And I loved doing something that related to, the creativity of building a new range and, pricing it and doing all of that. And while I was doing that, every morning I woke up with such joy in my life. I used to rush out to work, and my husband used to say, "Why are you going so early?" But I used to rush to work, and we had my whole team and myself, we were just at our brilliant best. We broke records, we did everything that we needed to do. Eventually, because the boss was so happy with the kind of work that we did, he promoted me, and he said, "Now you manage this chain of stores." And then I had to move into administration. And at that point, it was simple drudgery for me. And to wake up was difficult. So I want to answer your question, is that when you do something that you really are meant to do, you just have no idea of the time. You're actually going with the flow. You don't have any idea of the time. You have it doesn't feel like work at all. It feels like you're having a great time. And, we just won all the awards. We just broke all records. And our salary increments, we didn't even have to ask for it. It just happened. So, really, and then in the pursuit of, getting acknowledged as leading the company and doing this and doing that, I followed that. But I think I did that to my detriment. So, please learn from whatever I've learned.
By the way, the other thought that comes to me, and this was my insight, because I read close to 550 books in my journey across these different fields. 550 books, right? And what was amazing for me, right, if you really look across, we do hold science and spirituality on two dimensions, right? The reality is they're not. And really, if you looked at it, that is the beauty and that is the angle in. Two corporates to start to shift the work. Because if we talk about spirituality, a lot of people write it off, unfortunately, right? They're like, yeah, that's great, but different times. I'm not in a cave, I'm in a corporate boardroom. But really, if you think about these practices that are there, science has caught up over the last 20, 25 years. So we can engage from the science side of what proof they have rediscovered about something that's been around forever. And put it all together into some kind of a transformation, right, that we can actually drive. Because the results will come. So I think there is a different way in, but I think these practices are more relevant and more needed today. Because I really think we have lost our way.
Next question, please.
Hello, Ashish. Hi, Bina. Great moderation, Bina. Hi, Ashish. Thanks for such insights at the start of the year. I think one thing that struck a chord with me was build your community. Uh, in India, I think you would have experiences from the US, but in India, our community is mostly our relatives. When you move out of your hometown, the community just ceases to exist. You're driven into your offices and home, and that's all you have. I've recently gone on this discovery of how to build this community, but I still don't have an answer. So, a few tips from your side on how to do it, how to go about it would really be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so important, by the way, if I failed to mention, so one of the longest study on flourishing is actually a study which has been running in Harvard for the last 80 plus years and has now followed multiple generations, right? So it's an ongoing study. And what they found was the biggest drivers around happiness, flourishing, and how well people did was the quality of their relationships, right? So community really matters, really, really matters. It doesn't matter how many, but what matters is the quality, right, if you will, of those relationships. And we can think about community in three distinct buckets. We can think about them as friends that we grew up with. We think about them as family, of course. And the third is professional community or relationships in our community around us, right? People we interact with every day. And I think really consciously thinking about how we have more meaningful interactions versus superficial ones. I'll give you an example. How often do we say, "How are you?" And we say, "Fine," and we move on. Because we're not really interested in hearing how you are, and I'm not really interested. It's just a hello. But every one of those moments is an opportunity to actually, connect a bit more deeply with a human being. We all have battles that we are fighting in our lives. Many of them we don't share with others, right? So even a simple question of "How are you?" and if somebody says "I'm fine," saying "How are you really?" and giving space can create a real powerful connection, right? So I think that's one that I would say is don't do it for all of your "How are yous," but maybe there's a couple of them every day where you actually intentionally choose as an opportunity to connect with somebody more deeply. The second one, which is again something which is something I do, which just started, but I now put this into the book, is with friends. So one of the top regrets of the dying, work done by Bronnie Ware, a palliative nurse. Third amongst the top regrets of those who are dying was, "I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends." What's the simplest way to get in touch with our friends? Right? I have a habit. This is the only thing I really use Facebook for. It reminds me when one of my friends has a birthday. Instead of sending a Facebook text, I call them. Every day I'll at least call one or two people, remembering them on their day and really, rekindling that relationship. It brings me a lot of joy. It brings them a lot of joy because who the hell calls anybody these days, right? And so that's another really simple thing that we can do. And I think the third one is at work. Our work can be our biggest source of friendships. And so really connecting with individuals, maybe it's a simple thing. You're moved away from your family. You're here. Connecting with somebody at work and asking them to tell them your origin story. Their origin story and telling them yours. And it can be as simple as this, done over a lunch. Tell me about 2 to 3 life events that have shaped you into who you are right now. And you'll be amazed at knowing things about people that you would never have uncovered. You'll find commonalities. You'll find things about them. I had somebody who was a CFO, and we did this exercise with them. And he said, I grew up on food stamps. Most of the days we went hungry. And everybody thought this was like this person who kind of had this persona and right? Completely changed. It gave relevance to how he acted and what he did. He said, one of the things which most people didn't know about in that room was he actually, 30% of what he earned, he actually donated. Nobody knew that. He didn't, he didn't ever mention it. But so these are the kind of stories that come up. So this notion of really finding those moments, but we have to find them. And the way I do it is I actually hardwire them into my calendar, right? So that I stick to them and I make sure I protect them. But those are 3 ways in which we can actually truly, truly build a deeper community around, right? Call our friends on birthdays, connect with our professional networks, and find real deep conversations when we do have with people, at least 1 or 2 of them, on checking in how they are. Because I can tell you right now, if we did that conversation amongst, there's so many here who would say, yeah, I'm fine, but we're not really fine. And it's not that they need help, but sometimes just expressing how they're feeling can be a big solve. And you'll find that safe space that you've created for them. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, cool. So firstly, thank you for recognizing that a lot of these interventions that are taken by companies, etc., do tend to be individual. Like the cognitive dissonance as a student living in India, and you try and you go for individual interventions, it is wild. But this might be a little tangential, but I'd really like to know, as you said that these tend to be individual kinds of interventions, what are there, or is there any scholarship that lays down what are the points of systemic interventions, either by policy, governments, or corporations themselves that can be taken? So,
absolutely. And if you send me an email, I'll send you a white paper that I wrote, which has so many of them that I've sourced from the field. A great place, two great researchers who have done tons of work in this space. They're Kim Cameron and Jane Dutton from Michigan Ross. And I'll give you a couple of them, right? I think one is job crafting. So this notion of real conversations with teams around how we can craft our jobs to infuse more meaning into it. We can fundamentally, we can do task crafting within, so we can change our jobs to take things that are draining. We can relationship craft, build new relationships that might give us more meaning. Or we can purpose craft, really thinking about the bigger picture, right? The second intervention is, I was sharing this with Meena earlier, there is actually a science. We can actively find what are called positive energizers in our workplace. And we can actively create, curate, and amplify the impact that they can have in the world. That is, by the way, the second intervention is how do we create net energy creating places, right? We can make gratitude. Most companies have manager appreciation weeks or employee appreciation day. Why can't we integrate gratitude and what we are grateful for into our weekly status reports? What have we done? What are we accomplishing? Why can't we every week acknowledge people who made a positive difference this week in the work we did? Right? So gratitude is a powerful intervention. How are you? That practice of checking in on the state of being or the state of mind. Integrating a practice like a mindful moment is another one. People think about recharging only through vacations or at the end of the day. What if we could integrate recharge moments throughout the day? Many oil and gas companies have what's called a safety moment. Every meeting starts with a safety minute. This is where, if you go for fire, in case there's a hurricane, go here, this is a meeting ground. What if we started every meeting with one mindful minute? It gives us a chance to regulate our nervous systems, as we experienced, but also it increases the quality of discussion because we're no longer processing the prior meeting in our back-to-back meeting world, right? So there are so many interventions like this that if we integrate into our workplaces, we can actually create an environment where individuals flourish and much more becomes possible for us. So we can achieve more by actually doing less, right? Because I think we're all working pretty long hours in corporate today. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah, please, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Radhika Mahata. I'm a matchmaker and a dating coach. And
Very
welcome
cool.
to the Silicon Valley of India, Ashish. So I recently attended your Story Tech Sparks. It's a startup summit. And I remember Bhavish Agarwal, the founder of Ola, mentioning, quote unquote, हमारी जनरेशन के नसीब में work-life balance लिखा ही नहीं है. And for anybody who works in the startup ecosystem, they'll echo this sentiment. So clocking in those 60, 70, 80 hours per week, ensuring that your individual contribution continues to happen on a Saturday, Sunday, so that Monday onwards you're again a people manager and you're leading the teams and all of that. What would be the top 1, 2 hacks, tips, not for productivity, but to quickly address that burnout?
Yes.
Because that is for real. And particularly when people are at the, not people, but when the organization is at the Maslow's hierarchy of, let me just hit my ARR this quarter, otherwise my investor is going to fire me as the CEO, replace me by somebody, and 5 saal baad ka growth tab dekhenge. So then for now, when they are literally surviving quarter to quarter, figuring out things, managing the hiring, firing, everything, what would you suggest as the top hacks for people who are experiencing burnout? Thanks.
Yeah. So look, I think it's a great question, and it's a real problem, right? It's a real problem. So I'll answer the question this way. What are some things, if you are in the midst of that, right? What are some things that you can do to prevent burnout? Because it's an individual issue, right, that we face individually beyond a huge corporate waste. Individually, I think stress doesn't burn us out. I don't think stress burns us out. The research is very clear on that. You know what burns us out? Having not enough coping in between the stress incidents. Think about our bodies. How do we, when we build muscle, we are putting higher strain on our bodies. If we don't take recovery days, we won't grow stronger. We are anti-fragile by nature. So the answer is, one, can we, regardless of the hours are we working, can we integrate more micro breaks in the day? Think about, how do we recharge hourly? How do we recharge daily? How do we recharge weekly? Okay? So I think that's really, really important. And that's something which is, I think, in our control. I'll tell you the second is this notion of meaning, right? Finding meaning in what we are doing. Really actively doing that. Because I'll tell you, I don't believe in work-life balance. I think it's a myth. But I do believe in work-life integration. If over time we can make work filled with as much meaning as we make in life, I think we can stop this divide. I think it does more harm than good. Think about it this way. Why is it that we draw this hard line between work and life, but we don't draw a line between time I spend for myself, with my family, with my parents, with my friends, with things I love to do, etc., etc. We just draw a line between work and life. Because for many of us, work is just a way to live life. But going back to kind of what Beena was going, that's like we spend more hours working, right? Sleep is the only other thing we do more than work. We have to infuse meaning into it. At a corporate level, I think we need to integrate health scores in addition to performance scores. That's a tip, right? That I think if you can ask for that and integrate, that's a really big deal. Especially if you leverage the science of flourishing, which shows, if we are healthier and if we are flourishing, we get higher results. The other one that I will tell you to end and find some sanity in the kind of schedule is think about a lot of the overwork. Where is that going? Is in meetings, right? a lot of time we are in meetings back to back to back to back. One of the ways in which we can end this madness is to kind of really take a step back and think about which meetings do I need to show up versus not show up. If I'm in a people leader role, then changing that with my team. But if not, at least individually choosing and being bold enough to be able to cancel some of the meetings and not going to them. And creating space for deeper work. It is not easy in a startup world. It is not easy when you are not the one making decisions. But I think that's where I think some of these individual practices in the book that I highlight can allow us to build a bit more resilience. And of course, if nothing works, we can change what we do, right? That is always a choice we've got. But it is not easy. It is not easy. Does that answer your question? It's not easy.
I think we run out of time. So if there's one last question, we can take that. Otherwise, we can close.
Yeah,
sure.
Please.
Oh, she's also coming.
Hi, good evening. I'm Shimon.
Hi.
Hi. So I just recently graduated from university, so I'm an architect right now. But I'm still trying to figure out what my passion is. So I have many things that I like. So I'm trying to figure out, and I'm big on self-help. So I hear some gurus say, make a 5-year plan, make a 10-year plan. But then that stresses me out a lot because there's so many things that I want to do. So I just wanted to know, do you have any tips or what do you advise to someone who's trying to find happiness in uncertainty? Because there's so many things I want to try out, and I need to be happy in the present. So,
yeah, no, I think it's again a great question on purpose, and a lot of people talk about that, right? And it can just finding that can stress us out.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what it is, right? I mean, look, I didn't find what I wanted to do till I was 44. Right? But what is important is where you can go is you might not know what your passion is, but you know what you love, and you know what you don't love. Right? If we go back in your life, think about what did you like to do, what brought you joy, what were those things that you lost track of time. You can also look at what your strengths are. You can ask your friends and those you worked with. You can take something like the VIA Character Strength Survey or many of the other surveys, which highlight 3 to 4 strengths that you have. We know when we work on our strengths and when we work on integrating and working in environments that we like versus what we don't like, when those two come together, that is passion. Right? You will fall in love with it. You will enjoy it a lot more because it's inherently something that brings you, you love it, and it's leveraging your strength, which means you'll keep getting better and better and better at it. So that's a good place to start, right? Which is what I'm doing in an environment, in the pace, the interactions I'm having, something that I love to do, I lose track of, and is it leveraging my strength? Start there. Those are knowable things. What's the purpose of life? What's the meaning? I think those are harder things to nail. But these two are easy because you can answer them. Yeah?
thank you.
Do we have? Okay.
Can I just conclude? I forgot to introduce myself. I am Rajesh Subramanian. I stay in Indira.
Hi, Rajesh.
Hi. See, there's been a lot of talk today about Indian people must work for 70 hours or 72 hours a week. Okay, and it's been discussed in Parliament as well.
Yes.
Now, will this lead to happiness? What is your take on this? I would like you to really elaborate on this topic.
Look, I'm not sure. I'll tell you my take on it. First of all, I'm not sure why, as I mentioned, with the level of efficiency that we have, with the level of prosperity we have, the need to work for 70 plus hours shows that how inefficiently we are actually working, right? One of the instruments that we've actually designed at Happiness Squad that I'm actually leading in the work we're doing with organizations is we're actually quantifying what we are calling organizational human potential. So we're creating an index at an overall level and at an individual level that shows on a 0 to 100 what potential are you operating at, right? Because what I want to bring and quantify for organizations is you're making people work 16 hours, but if they're at 30% efficiency, you're only getting 5-6 hours of work. And by the way, that's 5-6 hours of work. Forget about the cost you're paying in terms of the quality of decisions that they're making or the high attrition that you have. But I mean, look, 70 plus hours, if it is hours without meaning, and a bigger why, I think there is no way that it's a good thing, right? And I'm not sure it's actually needed. My estimate across the clients I've served is there is almost very few organizations I've found that are operating above 30%, right? So for most organizations, I actually think there is an opportunity to do a lot more by cutting back the hours, right? If I'm able to take a 12 hours and up that from 30% to 60%, I can free up time, right? So we don't need that. But yeah, that'll be a way I would address it.
Okay, I think we have to close now. First of all, I would like to thank Ashish for being here and sharing his personal journey on his search for happiness and also his book, Hardwired for Happiness. By the way, as I mentioned earlier, the book is very easily available on Amazon. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the BIC for hosting this program. The whole team at BIC have been very prompt and efficient, as always, in all their communication and planning. Thank you to all of you, those behind the scenes as well. We do hope that many of you walking out today are empowered with more knowledge on how to make yourselves happier. Thank you once again for being here.